What's going on, Sharp Football family? It is your resident Swami of Konami, Rich Hribar, and we are here inside of a month to the NFL draft. We've been running down kind of all of these positions from kind of a fantasy football lens, but we mix in a lot of real football talk too. If you check out the quarterback show I did with Ryan McChrystal on Tuesday, please go back and check that out if you want to follow the quarterbacks. Today, we're talking about the meat and potatoes of this class, the running backs, kind of what everyone's excited about. We'll find out if our guest is excited about that as well. I'm getting a chance to talk to one of my favorite people in the industry, one of my favorite people in general, and that is Sigmund Bloom. I had the great fortune to come and hang out with him, in his hometown of New Orleans now, byproduct of, Pittsburgh, but, getting to hang out with him last month, for the Super Bowl. We didn't see the greatest of football games, but the company was great. Sig, how are you doing?
Yeah, it was a joy to get to watch the Super Bowl on my couch with you and Ian Hartitz and Justin Edwards
It was on the
and
couch.
Chris Allen and most importantly in New Orleans, where we had some experiences we'll remember and some that we won't remember because we were having such a good time. But I think it's going to be a good time for draft running backs, maybe not so much for the veteran running backs. I think that's the wave. The tsunami of rookie running backs is going to mess up a lot of backfields and a lot of values. Maybe not immediately, but in the next year or two, I think we're going to learn about what teams think about their backfield and that they want some new blood in them.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I wanted to kick it off because, anytime I have you, we don't need a show sheet. We're going to have a conversation and kind of let some
Yeah.
things guide us. But I did want to kind of kick off as like kind of like the waterfall to kind of get us started here. It's like how you view this running back class and how you see it impacting the current running back landscape. And you can kind of take that to Dynasty, to redraft, because I do think there are implications in both areas. So when you go to this spot we were in like a year ago, and free agency had just happened, and it was a hot running back free agency. We had a lot of career producers, hit the free agent market, Derrick Henry and Aaron Jones and Saquon Barkley and all these guys. We saw Joe Mixon get traded. And then, we had them immediately follow this draft class that was very, very soft. And, we didn't see a lot of draft capital invest in the running back position. I mean, the top running back that was drafted had a torn ACL. And, unfortunately, the hope speedy recovery to Jonathan Brooks, but unfortunately that he re-injured that injury this year. But now this year it's different. We saw a very soft free agent class, and we have a very rich NFL draft, and we've seen that there wasn't a lot of very movement. A lot of the deals that even got signed were just 1-year deals,
Right,
for these running backs. So yeah, let's start there and kind of kick it off. So I take it you do believe that this is a strong running back class.
it is a strong running back class, but let's be clear, it's a strong running back class in its depth. It's a strong running back class in the ability to get a contributor or a role player in the third day, maybe even undrafted free agents. And I think what people will need to adjust to is maybe a typical third round quality running back is going to be there in the fourth or fifth round this year. A typical fourth round quality running back is going to be there in the sixth or seventh round. And running backs that are usually drafted are going to be available after the draft. And if you go through and step through the backfields, you will find that if you simulate, does it make sense for this team to take a running back? You're not going to have more than, say, 16 or 20 teams. You're going to probably have a list of 15 teams where you say it really doesn't make sense for them to take a running back. And what people need to be ready for are teams that we don't expect to take running backs are going to take running backs in this draft. So if you're a dynasty fantasy football player, you may want to try to get out ahead of that and try to pick a few running backs that maybe people don't expect to have their value torpedoed, but could, because there are going to be, someone like, say, Isaac Guerrero, or even someone like Devin Achane. I think these coaches from the McShanahan tree are going to find it really hard to sit on the sidelines with a running back class like this.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we kind of talk about some of those players, do you think that also, because there's always a double edge to this. So we could have in one stance teams looking at this draft class and saying it's deep. We'll wait to take a player later because that player that's available in the fifth and sixth round typically wouldn't have been available in the fifth and sixth round in previous years. But also, is there a flip side where the strength of this draft class, or the depth of this draft class, almost hurts the depth of this class, like the top of it, because it then pushes these guys down? If you get to these guys that are running back 15, 16, 17, 18 that do look objectively like quality players, though, but now they don't get kind of the capital, or they fall into a spot, like you said, maybe behind a couple guys that they're in some competition with some players that might be better. So is there a chance that this draft class could eat its own tail a little bit?
I think what's going to be really interesting to see, Rich, is these guys like Omarion Hampton and Quinshon Judkins, Kaleb Johnson. So you have two things in tension. One is that it's an overall weak draft. And what I mean by that is that there's not a lot of blue chip talents at the top of the draft, and there's a vast plateau that maybe starts around pick 20 and stretches into the third round. So you're right, with the depth of this class, it may cause teams to say, well, we could get Hampton in the late first or early second, or Judkins, but also we could get Damian Martinez in the fifth round. Right, we could get Montrell Johnson in the sixth round, who can give us a similar element, even if it isn't as physically talented or as productive or as ballyhooed by the draft class. So you're right about that. But at the same time, I think the weakness at the top of the class might motivate teams, especially, we're all watching Cleveland and Denver and Dallas, right, and Las Vegas, Chicago, and saying, well, these teams might just say, this is the running back we want, and we're going to make sure we get that running back because we're not giving up a player we can't live without because of the weakness in the class. So you're right. There's a wide range of possibilities, and that's what I think we need to be ready for is the unexpected. Expect the unexpected with running backs in this draft.
And I'm glad that you kind of hinted on like the archetypes of the players in this class, because I do feel like the current NFL landscape and the probably the strength of this class, when we start breaking up where the strengths of the archetypes are, these running backs, it is those early down runners. And we might just have a surplus of those guys. And, when we tie that into our world of fantasy football, if you're going to be a player that's playing on early downs, you have to score a lot of touchdowns, because if you're not going to be catching a lot of passes, like you brought up Damian Martinez, he's one of my favorite players, like day 3 players in this draft class. Like I, for some reason, just keep praying that he ends up on the Bears. Like he's Ben Johnson's dude to be Dave. But, that's kind of what we're all hoping for. Who's Ben Johnson's dude? But, I don't think that he has a clear lane, to be involved in the passing game early on in the NFL. And we have a lot of these guys that are in that group. Like DJ Giddens from Kansas State is very much in that, bro. Like the best of DJ Giddens is really good, but like he's one of the worst pass protectors in this class. He's got terrible hands. Like if he ends up going like 5th or 6th round and like he's just an early down banger, like where's his path? And from like a dynasty stance or like a rookie draft stance, and it's tough. So I'm glad you brought up those archetypes, because in the back there, we might see the pass catchers have more value. There's a chance like someone might want a Brashard Smith or a Jaden Blue, and like those guys end up with a better runway than maybe a player we think's better, like a better player than them, just because of where they go in terms of draft capital and landing spot.
Yeah, we've seen, it's funny, Ben Johnson is at the center of this conversation, because what Ben Johnson showed us in Detroit, as I am wearing my Detroit Lions throwback t-shirt today, is that you can have 2 high-quality fantasy running backs in the same backfield. And they can be that archetype of the early down banger, the touchdown scorer, but they can also be the archetype of the space player, the speed player. And you mentioned a couple of good names that can fill that role for a team. So, this all harkens back to, say, 20 years ago when Bill Belichick was out ahead of the curve with a running back by committee. And people said, running back by committee is never going to work because it makes the plays too predictable. But here we are, where I think running back by committee is the default for teams. But that's what makes someone like Ashton Jeanty so valuable now. And why I think probably if I'm going to get out ahead of the hot take merchant role that we play here, is that I think the gap between Jeanty and your running back 2, whoever it is bigger than that running back 2 and say running back 15 or 20 in this class. And that maybe is the headline, is how much and what's going to be really interesting, Rich, is Jeanty might go at 6 or 9 or 10. And who knows, Hampton might go at 12. Hampton might go at 20 or 21, and it might make it appear that they're both first-round picks. They're both running backs that teams were willing to stick at their neck out for and spend valuable draft capital on. But I think in terms of impact, fantasy impact on a team's arc, it's not even close.
Yeah, I could not have anyone else in JT's tier either. When I broke them into tiers, it's like there's no way. Even with the capital, there might be some final scores that like end up close, but there's still just one player in that top tier. I don't think we're going to spend a lot of time on him, but you could see the type of player he is by just seeing him mentioned. Like we saw New Orleans kind of creep into the picture, like. And we have our team needs coming up down the pipeline. And when I got to the New Orleans backfield, I totally was like, yes, this is a total spot where they could invest to a real big time running back. Alvin Kamara, who's never rushed for 1,000 yards, missed time each the past 4 years. He's going to be 30 this year. Their backfield depth was exposed last year, amongst other things of their depth, the Mickey Loomis way of, building a team that's very, front forward facing, and the depth kind of gets undercut when you always are trying to dip into the money in the banana stand. But they don't have much. So it's like, yes, this is a spot that makes sense too to be a fit. So like you're seeing the type of talent he is and be brought up, basically linked with anybody after, pick 3. Could they potentially grab him? But yeah, I mean, one of the things too with this running back class, you brought about like the landscape of where we are in the NFL. So rushing has become more prevalent in this modern era where you're seeing the 2 high safeties and a lot more zone coverage, but also we're still seeing running backs still not accrued massive amounts of touches either. Like, we had 7 running backs average 20 touches per game last year. And even with the 17th game added, we're not seeing a lot of running backs yearly get to those 300 touches, which has opened the door for guys like the Jahmyr Gibbs and Devin Achans. I mean, Sig, those guys from a fantasy football stance a decade ago would have said, like, you're reaching for a player that's only getting 15 to 17 touches per game. Like, he can't be an RB1. And that's completely flipped now. And we have a few of these guys in this draft class, particularly, I think, starting with after, Amari and Hampton, we have Travion Henderson. And where is he going to go? And Travion Henderson, I believe, is a guy who's still drawing live to be selected over Amari and Hampton if a team believes he can have that impact that Gibbs and Achane made.
Yeah, you're right. It's just what teams value. And I think with Henderson, you have the acceleration and the speed, the ability to make chunk plays. And that's why also a guy that kind of straddles both groups that I think is going to be really interesting to watch is Bashal Tootin. Because I would expect at this point that he is probably running back 6 or 7 in this class, and he will go on the second day, and he will be a running back that, especially with the McShanahan system, with his combination of contact balance and long speed, I think his vision, you put those things together, and there might be teams that like him better than the bangers like Judkins and Hampton and Kaleb Johnson. So, I think that's another thing we have to keep in mind is everybody's board's going to be different. Different teams are going to be valuing different things in this draft class, and it's going to surprise people the order that these backs go off the board, and it might really confuse things for a Dynasty fantasy football rookie draft because we might have them ranked in a vacuum a certain way, but no team is ranking running backs in a vacuum. They're ranking them for their system and what gets magnified the way they run the ball.
Yeah, let's stay in that the kind of that archetype bucket for thing. So we got Travion Henderson, kind of the front line of that group, but you brought up 2 in. We've got Dylan Sampson too,
yes,
kind of be in that same bucket, and those guys don't have the objective profile that Travion Henderson had in terms of generating big plays. Definitely Sampson. It's weird. And Tennessee is just one of those teams that is always hard since I've been doing the last couple of years of trying to just like follow Tennessee skill players because they just don't play a real offense. They exploit the college rules. And it's really hard to especially their wide receivers coming to the NFL. It's really kind of hard to nail down like how they're going to fit. A little bit different when you're just handing a guy a football, but a lot of Dylan Sampson's production, like he just doesn't have those big plays. When you think of them spreading the field out and playing hash to hash at the college level, his explosive run rate wasn't high at all. It was one of the lowest in his class. He only faced 6 guys in the box like every run because of the way the offense was structured. But he is young. He does have kind of like that big play potential. He just didn't really tap into it. And that did happen with Achane a little bit in college as well. So kind of where are you at? And like with those 2 guys, and like, could those guys be kind of like fit like the proxy of Travion Henderson?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Sampson is another running back that we should be prepared to go maybe in the second round. Lance Zierlein, and if you're not, your first stop when it comes to just getting up to speed on the draft class, just because Dane Brugler's beast isn't out yet at The Athletic. Should be NFL.com and Lance Zierlein and Chad Ryder and everything they're doing there. And Sampson is ranked in that second tier. And I think that that's probably reflective of how teams are going to look at Sampson. He brings something a little bit different because he does have at least that initial acceleration. And like you said, it hasn't necessarily resulted in big plays, but he does have a second gear. He does have the determination, contact balance, ability to get yards after contact, even though he's a smaller back. You watch him in that Tennessee uniform, you can't help but think a little bit of Alvin Kamara, who we are bring up for the second time in the show. So yeah, I do think that Sampson could be a player that we end up third or fourth in our rookie rankings after the draft, because a team that runs the ball well might like him a lot more than the rookie draft rankings right now. Like when we're drafting him in a vacuum, a team that likes what he has might set him up for success better than some of these other big backs.
Yeah, and that's kind of how I'm going to be approaching a lot of these landing spots. Is kind of, where stylistically the fit, what kind of role could they potentially have early on. I'm curious too, later on, like that little group kind of like peters out, with after 2 in. I mean, you kind of have, RJ Harvey in that group. He's a tough guy to kind of nail down too, an older player. He's in that same bucket though, just a little bit over 200 pounds. He's fast, but then just didn't face like any real good competition, didn't face anybody in the box either, and then just ran outside every play. Like they just ran outside runs, and they were like, we're in a position where you're a better athlete than everybody else. Like, I mean, he's a tough guy for me to try to figure out, like, all right, well, how does the team value this, and how do they try to put this, in place in their offense? And he's a guy that I always see kind of in that limbo area too.
Yeah, RJ Harvey, Devin Neal, Taj Brooks. I would just, in a very overly simplistic way, call these like try hard backs, effort backs, and those are guys like in the right situation, like say Bucky Irving. And I'm not saying that they're going to translate the way Bucky Irving has, but remember Bucky Irving at this time last year, we were saying, well, he had a poor combine, but if you watch him, it doesn't look like he is a pedestrian athlete out there. And one of the things, I guess I should take a step back and say, because you nailed it when you said fit, is if you watched the post-draft press conferences or you followed up on the reports, Liam Cohen said, Bucky Irving runs the ball the way I want running backs to run the ball in my system. Okay. So whatever you thought of Bucky Irving before the draft.
And he had a chance to draft his guy, Ray Davis, and took Bucky Irving.
Right. So I think that landing spot, 20 years ago when I started doing this, Rich, I would have said talent is everything. Talent creates opportunity. Landing spots, who cares? Because the talent is going to rise to the top. But now I do think that fit and alignment with running backs, skills and traits, and what is valued in a system is really, really important. And that's the thing with the variety of this class. Again, running back 6, 7, 8 down to running back 22 is probably pretty level when you look at it in an overall standpoint of talent and athleticism. But the teams that can identify the running back that fits and the teams that run the ball well, those are going to be the keys to finding the gems in the class, more than just seeing that this guy's talent stands out, because with the exception of Jeanty, nobody else really stands out in this class.
Yeah, and we got a few teams that don't run the ball well, but they're bringing in new people that we believe are going to run the ball. Like, listen, the Raiders are bringing in Pete and Chip Kelly. We know that they're not going to stand for what went down last year. The Raiders had the most inefficient running back rushing season we've seen in 20 years of the NFL. Those two guys are not going to stand for that. Does that mean they take a running back at 6 if they could take Jeanty? Not necessarily, but they also have high pick, in the second, third round. I'm very curious to see if they pass on Jeanty. If Chip's in his ear in round 2, if he has any say of like what he thinks about Judkins, right? Because Judkins is one of these guys that is consistently put, RB4, like the next best guy. But when you watch Judkins as like a power runner, he doesn't really have like a great feel for it. Like he tends to just run into dudes. And he doesn't have like a, that high yards after contact per carry. They saw this too. He faced like Power 5 opponents. Like he didn't rush very efficiently. So I'm very curious to see if people view him as like a true down guy, because I still think he could have some hangups in that area.
Yeah, I think that the very simple comparison of, and I know that they were in different roles of just Henderson and Judkins, and you mentioned efficiency. I think that is going to be something interesting to watch how the NFL separates these two backs, even though they're completely different archetypes, because they were running behind the same line, they were in the same offense, but the results were very different. And I agree with you that Judkins is one of those backs that maybe hasn't figured out a way to harvest all of his gifts yet. And while that
And
might
that's
be,
Tootin too, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, I would tend to agree with that. I mean, I think with Tootin, what you would hope is that he is in a system that simplifies things for him and gets that acceleration and that extra burst into play. So you're right that we can look at these running backs that have potential, that have untapped latent potential, but you also have to say, well, if they weren't able to find it in college, one of the things I think people vastly overestimate is how much players develop in the NFL, how much players change, how much they learn. It's really now what teams do is try to develop players within their system, try to develop players to fit in their system. But as far as just becoming better players, that's more of a player to player thing. And when someone gets taken under the wing of a veteran and they show them the ropes, this is how you're a professional, this is how you prepare, here's how I've been a success. But we vastly overestimate how much players are going to get better, especially in a position like running back where they get opportunity early. And Rich, if they don't produce early, they end up getting thrown to the curb pretty quickly.
yep. Yeah, absolutely. And so let's talk about some of these fits too for like maybe some of these players, because there are players where I think when you want to do like prospecting, and for like the decade plus I've done it and you've done it for much longer than I have, one of the things that we can sometimes get enamored with is tearing a player down. Like when you're like, well, he can't do this, so therefore, I don't want him. And this running back class has a few of those guys as well. But there are, when we say like if this guy falls into the prestige landing spot or someone knows what they're drafting, the strengths of his game, which we believe would happen more often than really does happen. Let's talk about some of those kind of fits that could excel. Because like one of these guys in this draft class is Kaleb Johnson, right? Kaleb Johnson, was basically the Iowa offense, just typical Iowa offense that hasn't joined the 20 first century of playing football. Even last year, they still couldn't throw the football. They know that you're going to hand it off to him, and you know that you just want to run outside zone with him. But the interesting thing about Kaleb Johnson is he's 224 pounds, but he's not looking to run anyone over. He's not looking to kind of feed off contact. He's looking to actually play more of a finesse game. And so where do you see him kind of fitting in for a team that kind of wants to get him as potentially that early down guy?
He's probably a second round pick, maybe a third round pick. I do think that just based on the eye test, Johnson isn't that different than Hampton. However, like you said, I think Hampton has a much better sense of who he is and what he brings to bear than Johnson does. And then I'll bring a third running back into this conversation, and Ollie Gordon.
Yeah.
And I think what's going to be really interesting is I could imagine teams having Ollie Gordon in the same bucket with Hampton and Johnson if you're looking at 2023 Gordon. And everything that went wrong for him this year really wasn't on him. So I think that one of the other things when I consider all this is we may see running backs go in the first round and the second round, and that's really important at running back because teams will force work to the players they invest in to prove that they were right to take the player early. But a team that takes Ollie Gordon in the fourth round might have him ranked as a second round value, especially, Rich, when we see teams that shouldn't be needing a running back, shouldn't be taking a running back early on the third day. It might just be that they say this guy is so good and he fits so well in our system that we can't pass on the opportunity to get him, even though we might not need him for a year or two. Or you brought up some of the running backs that were signed just for 1 year, like Jalen Warren, Pittsburgh, or Najee Harris with the Chargers. So you look at those backs and you can easily see that, a la, say, Bucky Irving and Rachaad White, the rookie running back drafted in the fourth round could easily overtake them by the end of the year.
And we have a lot of guys too that are crossing that contractual bridge too. We've got this year Travis Etienne, who played on the 5th-year option, is going to be a free agent. Like, no one's talked about the Jaguars taking running back, because on the surface you're like, hey, they have Travis Etienne, they have Tank Bigsby. But what if they don't have it's a new regime? What if they don't have Travis Etienne next year because his contract's up? We've got guys like Brian Robinson's contracts coming up. We've got just like a number of guys that are kind of just in limbo here, where you're like, that dude's a good player. They don't need him right now, but maybe they're thinking a year or two out, like we're not pressed now to pay this player because we can just in-house rotate this, which happens as well. It's gonna be interesting to see what happens with like a guy like Chase Brown, right? Too, like, who we love the way he finished the season. Did the Bengals dip their toes into the water here at all with any of these running backs either? So those are all the things that like you got to try to factor in. Like you said, like on the surface, some of these guys are going to get drafted in spots where you're like, oh, and keep that in mind if you like the player, the rookie. Because there's a lot of times where we might like a player and he gets buried in rookie drafts because you're like, well, now he's behind so-and-so. He's not going to get to play for a year or two. But keep that in mind that there could be a lot more fluidity in these situations as well in those spots. I like that you brought that up as well.
Yeah. I'll throw the Jets out there too, because that's a combination of a new regime and Breece Hall is coming up next year. So teams,
Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson, Sauce Gardner, everyone's up at Elijah Vera Tucker. They're all up this year.
Yeah. So this is a whole blueprint of a team that might be changing with a new GM and a new head coach. So I just think we have to keep our head on a swivel for a lot deeper group of teams taking running backs potentially early than if you just look at the depth chart and you just look at the production they have in the backfield and think, well, they won't take a running back. Be ready for some of those teams to take running backs.
Yeah, and especially some of the teams that definitely got exposed. I think the Colts are one, right? Like the Colts got exposed last year, behind with Jonathan Taylor's injury. We brought up the Saints being kind of exposed, with their situation. So definitely look for a lot of those teams to kind of, really reach into the bucket here in this draft class. Let's talk about some more of these players, though, because everyone's wants to get the takes on the players. So we talked a little bit about some of the guys at the top. We gotta get to. And probably the most interesting name, I think, in this draft is Cam Skattebo.
Yeah.
I really think he's the most interesting player because I think there's such a wide range of not just what scouts feel about him, but what I believe the NFL is going to value too. I just think that when you look at Cam Skattebo, I think arguably one, I'm not like by no means am I Greg Cosell or anybody that knows I'm not Waldman.
Sure.
But I still think, his game versus Texas is the best game I saw a running back play this past season. I just like, my naked eye, I'm like, that's the best I saw a running back play. This dude put the whole team on his back and almost won them the damn game that they shouldn't have won. But I just feel like someone's going to value what Cam Skattebo brings to the table because he does everything and he's gnarly.
Yeah, that's the thing. We can go back to like Peyton Hillis, that one great year that Peyton Hillis had. You remember? I think wasn't he on the Madden cover after that?
He was on the Madden cover.
Yeah, I mean that's how good he was that year. And there's the natural sorting process of the draft, and teams don't always rationally draft. Sometimes they're skewed in what they see a player, what they think the player can become. But you hope that the natural sorting process is that the team that takes Skattebo, say in the 3rd round or 4th round, really likes what he brings to the table, right? And he has exceeded expectations at every point. Why wouldn't that trend continue? Why wouldn't a team, and here's your Bucky Irving in the sense of you might look at his lack of lateral agility or, truly being a sudden player in a phone booth, but not every running game requires that. And then there's that it factor. Matt Waldman would call that integrated technique. The it factor with him, that determination, stamina, and that idea of I want the ball. I want the ball in the 4th quarter. I want the ball in overtime. That's a certain kind of old school coach. This is a guy where, hey, you mentioned Pete Carroll. If the Raiders take him in the 3rd round, I might move him up to 2nd or 3rd in terms of fantasy football arcs and ranges of outcomes because of how much he fits what Marshawn Lynch brought to Pete Carroll teams. So I do think he's the wild card where we may look at him as just another back to cycle through in a committee backfield. But we also, if he doesn't have any stiff competition, we may look at him as a guy that can take over a backfield through the whole 4 years of his rookie contract.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think by far he is the most interesting player in like this group. Because like you said, the range on him and just what people think about him is very intriguing. But like if he doesn't really do anything like super poorly, and like I said, and that is value. Devin Neal is very much like this as well, right? Like Devin Neal doesn't have like a standout where you're like, there's an elite trait that Devin Neal has, but he does a little bit of everything. And someone might say, yeah, like that's just like, I'm not going to strike out. Like I'm very rarely striking out with Devin Neal. Like if I need to get a 3rd and 2, he can get me a 3rd and 2. If I need to line him up in the slot, I can line up in the slot. Like there's all these different things you can do. And Skattebo is one of that types of players, and Devin Neal is one of those types of players where they kind of get lost in the sauce because they just don't have like that one elite kind of hallmark kind of calling card.
Right, like a Devin Singletary, where when they get opportunities, they show that they belong in the NFL and they can be productive and be a player with fantasy relevance, but they leave their team wanting more. They leave their team wanting to upgrade in terms of athleticism or their ability to make chunk plays or push the pile or perform specific roles. So that's what's difficult about these try-hard guys and why it fit. And really, I'm telling you, Josh Norris started doing this a while ago, and other people, Scott Barrett, do it. And of course, Coach Speed Index is out there. Greg Branos is out there, parsing what these GMs and offensive coordinators and head coaches say about these running backs and what they envision for these running backs might be the most important task when it's time to scout this class and decide who you're going to spend your picks on in your dynasty league.
Yeah, and like that was tried and true for Bucky Irving last year.
Yeah.
And he was him and Tyrone Tracy were like basically the only two rookie running back hits that we had come out of that last year's draft class. I mean, the light's still on for some of the other guys too, but they're the only ones. And Tracy's going to be an interesting guy. We see what the Giants end up doing. Did he do enough, in the back half of the season to, instill a lot of confidence, because that coaching staff, had problems with his fumbles and stuff too. But they, hopefully they give him more runway.
Yeah, well, and just to piggyback on what you're saying, we're going to find out what Miami thinks about Jalen Wright.
Yes.
We're going to find out maybe what the Rams think about Blake Corum. We're going to find out maybe what the Packers think about Marshawn Lloyd. So, or even what the 49ers think about Isaac Orendo. I mean, that's the
we know the 49ers are taking running back.
Right. I know there's no suspense there. But I mean, there's so much information that we get. I like to say that teams can't lie in the draft. Teams can't lie when they put that name down on that card, and they're telling us what they think about the player they're drafting, but they're also telling us what they think about the players they have on the roster right now.
Yeah, 100%. And that's what makes this such a draft class as it enters the NFL. This is going to nuke so many of those guys hanging on to rosters right now that were probably roster cloggers anyway. Guys like, Kendre Miller, right? Like you're just going to see some dudes just get absolutely obliterated. Quinshon Judkins, teams that are just on rosters. And you're like, well, maybe if this guy gets a shot, kind of how Kaleb Herbert was for a couple of years, right? So you're hoping he gets a shot. Like, is there something here? Like we're going to see a chunk of those guys just get kind of blown to smithereens here. With this draft class. Is there anyone you want to steer me towards that you want to bring up? Like who's catching the eyes of Sigmund Bloom that maybe, you don't see out here, getting a lot of shine?
Yeah, well, and I say this where other people are giving some of these guys shine. We mentioned Brashard Smith. I think that Brashard Smith is really interesting as a guy that has some chops as a downfield receiver. He can get small. Being small can be a trait that is valuable at running back so one of the things whenever you're watching these running backs in college, the holes are going to be smaller. They're going to close faster. So how do running backs do with small cracks? How do running backs do whenever the play doesn't exactly get blocked as designed? I think that he showed some skill in addition to the long speed he has and the initial burst he has. I mentioned Montreal Johnson. I think that he actually, when you're just looking at pure power and explosion and size, all kinetic energy, one of the things I'm always looking at, Rich, when I'm watching these running backs is just how much kinetic energy do they generate? Watch the way that guys bounce off of them when they try to tackle them. Watch how many guys it takes. How good, this is where Dylan Sampson, I think, is really fun to watch, is how good of a tackle do you have to summon up to bring this guy to the turf? So I think that Montreal Johnson definitely falls into that category. If you're looking at running backs that weren't invited to the combine, Ja'Cory Crosky-Merritt out of Arizona, he's somebody I think that's on a lot of people's lists. You mentioned pass catching running backs, LaQuint Allen from my alma mater, Syracuse. He's a guy that may end up being at the very least a Kenneth Gainwell type. You mentioned Jaden Blue earlier. He's another one that's an alternative later on to Travion Henderson. But he's got some things where you want to see better vision. You want to see him be able to bring to bear what he has more often. And that's not something that necessarily gets better. But these are all backs that are going to be there on the third day and really surprise people. I guess the other guy I'll mention too is Khalil Mullings, who is another guy that just, you have to bring it to get him to the turf. He has, for a big guy, some flexibility. He has a second gear. Even though he's cast as a power back, he surprises you with some of the secondary skills he has.
And I like that you brought up Rashard Smith. One of my late round dynasty hacks for years at wide receiver and running back has always been, are you good in the return game? Can you earn a roster spot while early on you're cutting your teeth as a late round pick, but you're a good returner and you just kind of earn your spot. And then eventually either injuries and they just like force you in and they're like, oh yeah, this dude can play. I forgot he can actually play the position. Right. That's why we drafted him. And Rashard Smith has that. Like, I think Rashard Smith's going to be probably a kick returner to open, and then he can maybe weasel his way into third downs and then get more, you know what I mean? He's going to hang around on rosters because of the special teams play is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And that's always like been a little life hack for dynasty for me when I'm taking guys. It's like, all right, well, I know this guy is a long shot, but I know he's going to keep making rosters. Like he's good in that maybe you just need the door to open and then him to use that opportunity. I'm glad you brought up LaQuint Allen. Very interesting player because of his pass game production. I'm going to date myself here and date us because, he reminds me of is you remember Harvey Williams?
Yeah. LSU.
Yeah. Because LaQuint Allen is a pass protector. He's like having an extra lineman. He can catch the ball in the backfield, but that's like Harvey Williams was that guy that like never was an elite runner, but was used in a passing game, was used as a pass protector. And I think like that's going to earn him roster spots because he's just so good in pass protection. And like, he's so willing in pass protection, which we don't get a lot of in college. It's always the one translation point that is tough. That's why Travion Henderson at his size is thought of to be, where he is regarded as a first round pick because he's not scared to just go in there and stick it in pass protection. Like Quinn Allen is awesome in pass protection. He has a lot of work to do as like an efficiency based runner, but I do think that his pass protection and receiving role is going to like get him to kind of hang around on some rosters. And then he can just fall into the end zone for us in fantasy. That's okay.
Right. And, if he ends up on a team like the Bengals, a team that is a pass first team, he might have an outsized role compared to a team like the Raiders that want to be traditional, or Seattle or Dallas that want to have a more traditional running game. And the other thing that I'll say when you bring up Allen and you bring up the idea of pass protection and Henderson is, I've always thought, we have all these categories or columns in our scouting reports for these players, but no matter the position, I like to incorporate a column that I just title competitive toughness. And that is something that either can bring a player's game together, can be the rug that ties the room together, as I see your Abide art behind you, or it can be the thing that's missing that we say, why didn't this player hit? Why didn't this player make it despite everything they had going for them? That competitive toughness. And you're right that their willingness, I think you see that with willingness. You watch a running back, when they know that the run is over and they're going to get tackled. What kind of effort do they summon up? Again, how does it take a second guy and a third guy to bring them to the ground? When they see that blitzer coming with their hair on fire, do they sacrifice their body, or do they even relish the opportunity to have that collision? That can be an indicator a lot more of whether a player is going to make it than their 40 time or their production.
Yeah, I like that. So we talked a lot about, we did actually touch on a lot of the individual players, in this draft. Yeah. There are some guys, like later on that we don't, like Woody Marks fits in that bucket. Sure. Dogs, like the team want to take him for pass catching. Jordan James, does someone believe that they're going to translate him into being more of like a pass catcher? The Delaware kid from Delaware, Marcus Yarns. To someone, I mean, so there are all these guys, but I do want to tie this into now more of like a big picture dynasty conversation about this draft class. We talked about a lot of the individual players, but I want to know how you're approaching this draft class in terms of like in context of the other positions. I flippantly have made the commentary a few times on the show that I'm not going to draft anything other than rookie running backs this year. And that probably is, tongue in cheek, but I actually do think when you lay the percentages out, the majority of my picks in this rookie drafts are going to be running backs. And when I was hanging out with you in New Orleans, we had a little conversation about this class versus last year in context of the wide receiver. So I want to know how you're handling these running backs, and then we'll see what kind of where we steer this thing.
Yeah, the hot take here is that last year's rookie draft is going to really skew expectations for what kind of value you're going to get from your picks in the second half of the first round. Because there's no Brian Thomas Jr., there's no Ladd McConkey. You're not getting these guys. I would say, and then maybe it's a little bit of revisionist history because we got to see them play for a year, but I don't even know if a Ted McMillan is going to, at his peak, outproduce a McConkey or Brian Thomas. And I think that you're going to see a much steeper drop off in the first round in terms of value. And I would tell people right now to be very willing to either package up your late first round picks. I would go like 1-7 in next year's first, and the first after that 2027 first to get up to 1-1 for Jeanty. There's somebody, one of my devoted followers, who I usually get in my ear around this time of year about rookie draft stuff. I'm trying to convince him to trade 1-2 and 1-4 to get up to 1-1. So I think that while you're right that rookie running backs are where you're going to get your bang for your buck, it's going to be more like in the third or fourth round. It's going to be those running backs that fall to the fourth or fifth round in a good organization and a good offense that are blocked initially, but the team is showing us we like this player. We think this player has a future with us. People are going to get more caught up on the running backs that have immediate opportunity, but even if you have immediate opportunity, if you can't take advantage of it, or if a team doesn't set you up for success, it doesn't matter. So I agree with you about focusing on running backs, but I would honestly be willing after, say, 1-6, 1-7, maybe even a little earlier than that, to trade down to get extra picks for following years, especially in a super flex league. I'll toss out one more thing because so many thoughts running in my head at once about all this. In a super flex league, next year's picks are going to be worth so much more because of how poor this quarterback class is. And another thing that is going to skew people's expectations is in super flex rookie drafts last year, you were seeing Bo Nix or Michael Penix or JJ McCarthy fall to the mid-second round, which is just unheard of for a quarterback that has basically an unimpeded path to start in year one or year two to be available. This year, you're probably going to see the quarterbacks that have an actual chance to start on the rookie contract dry up in the first round, and they're not even as good. That's the other thing you got to remember. The thing I remember is people are saying, hey, if Cam Ward, who's going to be the stone cold lock number 1 overall pick, if he was in last year's draft, he might have been quarterback 7. Right. So the bottom line is, even though it looks like a stable value year over year, these picks are worth much less than they were worth last year. And if you can get out ahead of that, you can profit.
Yeah, and that's kind of the top-down stance I have kind of weighed, like the like kind of lowbrow of like saying like this is what it is. I think middle to late first round picks are typically going to be worth less than what they usually are. And then, mid second round picks and late second round picks are probably going to end up looking a lot more valuable than they were, in previous years. Basically, when we go back and look at this from like 10,000 feet, a decade from now, and we start to analyze this draft class. But I am 100% with you, though, that if you have picks in this class, you should be selling out for 101. Like 100, like bar none, you should be selling out for 101. I think this is one of the worst years to have 102, 103, 104, 105. Like you should be absolutely doing whatever you can to pry away that 101 pick if you can.
Yeah. Well, and really go the extra mile. Don't get caught up on winning the trade based on immediate, like this is where I think people
good luck telling fantasy gamers that.
Right. But this is where people go astray. Look, Rich, this is I love that I get to address your audience right now, because this is something that in the last few years that has really come into focus for me. Okay. When you feel an urge to trade away a player or to trade for a player, if you're right, 95% of the time, you're going to win the trade, no matter how much you overpay by current value standards. Like, how quickly do things change, right? How quickly do we see what an overpay for Bucky Irving after he first started to break out within a few weeks, an overpay for Bucky Irving becomes a massive value. So if you feel that urge to make a trade, don't get caught up on, well, I'll toss in a third, but not a second. Don't get caught up on that stuff. And with Jeanty, look, Bijan Robinson, if you want an idea of like what's his value, I mean, I think that's his value. I think he brings to us a running back that we probably see once every 3 to 5 years. Saquon Barkley. Okay. That's the kind of caliber, the magnitude of talent that we have here. Not just talent, I'm sorry. It's talent married to skill, married to just a mentality. That's why I think I would love to see him paired up with Pete Carroll. It's just a mental, or the Bears. I think those are, and I think if we were I don't know what the betting odds right now on where he's going to land, but I think that those have to be the two most likely spots for him at this point. And like you said, if people really don't understand this, for a lot of teams' boards, I would guess that Abdul Carter, Travis Hunter, and Jeanty are going to be their 3 players well ahead of everybody else in this class. And if we saw what happened with Barkley once he got on a team and an offense that could really allow his talents to stand out. And I think when we look at what Ben Johnson has done with the Bears, or we look at what Marshawn Lynch was able to do with Pete Carroll, if he lands with one of those 2 organizations, then we should be very happy at his opportunity to max out in what matters for fantasy football, translating that from draft capital to production.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it's funny is that people were trying to tear him down a little bit for the box score against Penn State, like my son was, and I'm like, are you watching the same thing? Like, he's getting 7 yards every carry. Yeah, he's only getting 3 in the box score, but he's getting 7 yards every carry.
Right. And I think Matt Waldman has pointed out his incredible stamina, and this is really important in the NFL. He is as strong at the end of the game as he is at the beginning of the game. And the other thing, Rich, and I know this is totally non-scientific, here I am, the mayor of Narrative Street, but when you watch Jeanty, if you're just listening to the tone and tenor of the crowd noise, when he has the ball in his hand, everybody gets a little quieter or gets a little more excited, if it's a home game. But it's an excitement, it's an anticipation that only truly special talents can create. I think intuitively people understand that not many come this way like him, and that's that unknown upside that you want to sell out for. So yeah, give up 3 first-round picks for him. Give up players, give up Chase Brown plus for him. Give up Devin Achane plus a first, because this is going to be a guy, you want to talk about altering the landscape of fantasy football. This could be the guy that is the number 1 pick in fantasy drafts for the peak of his career, the 3-4 peak years of his career. We don't get many like that now.
I love that. And let's tie this into, there's 2 things I want to pick around. I have 1 wild card question for at the end, but I do want to say, let's tie this rookie class into what we haven't done is tied it into the 2025 redraft landscape.
Sure.
Right? So last year was the perfect intersection, like we talked about. We had bell cow running backs that were kind of discounted from a fantasy football stance because we've had the wide receiver boom, right? And then a site like Underdog has pushed that even to the forefront, right? And made wide receivers go earlier. And running backs have gotten pushed down. And we had productive players. So one of the biggest things you can always look back towards is like, well, who's scoring fantasy points? Typically, it's guys that scored fantasy points before. Now, eventually, you do have to have like that first year, but it's not shocking to see guys like Saquon Barkley, who was still like a first, second round pick, but then guys like Joe Mixon and Aaron Jones and Alvin Kamara be draft values last year with the way everything kind of migrated. It was like the perfect intersection of I'm not drafting an old running back. I'm drafting wide receivers early, and like these guys are just hanging out in like the 4th, 5th, 6th round. And we were scooping them up, it's all the time on the site. Like all these guys are recommended because they just built the way you should build around the way the ADP was last year. This year, I'm saying be very cautious. Like we're gonna be very cautious this year because there might be an overcalibration because these guys that fall into that bucket that you may think this year are going to have a lot more competition than they had last year. Like we entered last year's draft with Aaron Jones saying it's still just Ty Chandler. Joe Mixon went to the Texans. We were like, it's just Dameon Pierce. Like Alvin Kamara had nothing still. Like, and it's probably not going to play out the same way this year.
Yeah, you're right. And what's not going to be convenient, what's not going to fit nicely in a box is that, again, Denver, Cleveland, Las Vegas, Dallas, these teams that have wide open backfields where a rookie could take over right away and be very valuable, they might not be the teams that take running backs early. That's going to skew everything from a redraft perspective because we're going to look at those running backs, whoever they are. A 4th or 5th round running back from a redraft perspective in one of those backfields is going to be more valuable than, say, Omarion Hampton if the Chargers take him. So you are right to say there's a caution, not just with some of these players like a Najee Harris or a Jalen Warren, or, we saw last year Trey Benson or Blake Corum, and we thought, well, they're going to threaten the value of these veterans, and it didn't really come to pass. This year, it's going to be a lot more unpredictable, including some of the guys. We're going to look at these 4th or 5th rounders and think, oh, well, if they are unimpeded, that we're going to have another Bucky Irving on our hands. Well, not all of those guys are going to produce either. So I think you're right that it's going to be very unpredictable, and it's going to be something where it's not going to be convenient for us. It's not going to fall in this rational way where the teams that need running backs the most are going to spend the most on running backs. Teams are going to spend on running backs based on how much they like the player and the fit over the next 3 or 4 years, not just for this year.
I love it. I love it. I've got one last one for you. So one of the things I love about you and all of our conversations we've had over the years is you always harp on that one thing the fantasy community consistently gets wrong is just because something hasn't happened doesn't mean it can't happen. So I'm taking this to Travis Hunter. And I want to get your take on Travis Hunter being the guy. So one, you just tell me how you feel about Travis Hunter as a player and what you think he's best suited to do in the, kind of the NFL right now. But just because a player hasn't played both ways, could he still?
Sure.
So I kind of want to just get your Travis Hunter take and how you're handling him from a fantasy football stance, because everyone seems to be like, well, they've got 1 foot in, but they've also got 1 foot out.
Yeah. No, don't overthink this. He's number 2 in your rookie drafts. This is the reason to not trade out of 1-2 to get up to 1-1. He's the best wide receiver in this class. Okay. Yes. He's also the best cornerback in this class. But what's exciting about him is that whatever a team's plan is, he's going to alter that by his impact. So a team might go in saying, well, he's going to be a full-time cornerback, but we're only going to play him a package of 20 plays on offense. But if he's impactful on those 20 plays on offense, you can't put that genie back in the bottle. I really want him to end up with the Patriots. I mean, in terms of maximizing his value and having a coach, Mike Vrabel, who is willing to say, we're going to let this guy shine. So I think people are overthinking this because it isn't just based on the plan or what's happened before. We have not seen someone like Travis Hunter before, and it's not just athleticism. It's not just skills. The two things translate across. One of the most frustrating things, going back to one of my original hits, Brandon Marshall, one of the things that I saw in Brandon Marshall's game back in the day before he was drafted was he spent a year as a safety and was a pretty good safety at Central Florida. And now you saw when a player was going to jam him at the line, he would just throw him to the ground. Whenever the ball was in the air, that space belonged to him. He had a my ball mentality. So Travis Hunter being wired as a ball thief, Travis Hunter being wired as a player who has to compete for space as a cornerback has greatly improved what he has to offer. He's not just a speed wide receiver. He's not a finesse wide receiver. So I think that whatever he does, the other thing I'll say, Rich, just to tie this all together, is that there's no reason that he can't play about 60 or 70% of the snaps on both sides of the ball. And you just don't have him out there on obvious run situations. You don't have him out there on early downs. There's no need for him to absorb that punishment anyway, whether we're talking about taking on a blocker as a cornerback or blocking or otherwise being on these plays. I do think, going back to the running back by committee discussion, there's nothing you're tipping off. And if teams really are thinking, oh, Travis Hunter's not out there, we know it's going to be a running play. Well, then you change it up on them. Or Travis Hunter is out there, it's going to be a pass play. NFL coaches are a little more subtle thinkers than that. So I think that the caliber of his talent, the ability to translate, and the ability for those skills and traits to start to magnify and build on each other because he's playing. I mean, think about, if you understand the cornerback position, how much easier it is to get yourself open as a wide receiver. Think about, as a wide receiver, just this is unprecedented, and it's really exciting, and it is the one reason to not trade out of the 1-2.
Yeah, I was trying to, when I wrote this up and I wrote up his profile, I was just like, it's crazy that we're like talking ourselves out of, what potentially is like almost like Shohei Ohtani coming to baseball.
Yes.
It's just like, what if he is like, it's not just, and people use the phrase unicorn too often, but like, I even wrote up as like, why can't he play a lot of snaps on both sides? Everyone keeps saying he's only going to play like a sprinkling on offense or defense. Like you said, like
Why?
why are we shortchanging this and saying like that's the only avenue? Like that's the pipeline everyone's going to as a median outcome. What if the median outcome is what you said? What if the median outcome is he is playing basically 2/3 of the snaps on both sides of the ball and not coming in obvious rundowns and stuff like that? Like it feels like we're talking ourselves. Basically, as I'm saying is we're talking ourselves out of a very good football player because we don't understand what the fantasy value is going to be. But when you put it in the context of this class, like you're not taking him over Marvin Harrison Jr. You're not taking him over Malik Neighbors, right? Like
Right.
it's Tet McMillan and Matthew Golden, like
Right.
it's like Luther Burden, like it's like why? It's so yeah. I'm glad I thought like you were for sure the first person that was like I can't wait to ask Sig about Travis Hunter because he's the most Sigmund Bloom player there could be.
Yeah, and again, and I mean, and we can look around today in life, Rich, and we can see that the bounds of what's going to happen tomorrow are not what happened yesterday. New things are happening every day, and have a sense of awe and wonder when it comes to life and when it comes to players like Travis Hunter.
Yeah, I love that. I always appreciate getting you on here to talk about those things. We've got a couple minutes here out the door. Why don't you let everyone know what's going on this offseason at Footballguys, where they can find everything that's going on?
Yeah, I mean, we have a free rookie guide right now. I think there's about 140 players in it. We updated it for the Combine. We're going to update it for the Bloom 100, which will be coming out mid-April. I've been doing the Bloom 100 for 20 years now. It's the combined offense defense rankings for those in deep IDP leagues, with some wrinkles if you have tight end premium, which that's an interesting conversation worthy of an entire show. Superflex. It's just the most challenging types of leagues to sort out those things for the rookie draft. So I feel really fortunate that I get to do that every year, just as a way to get my thoughts on the rookies out there. We'll be doing Matt Waldman, which his RSP will be coming out here next week. He'll be on the couch. I'll be talking to him as always. One of my favorite rituals. We'll be hanging out the night of the draft, first round, reacting in real time, and it's just a great time. The amount of information and the amount of intelligence collectively we have to tap into has never been higher, and I'm just happy to be in there somewhere with people like you, Rich.
I love it. I love it. Listen, you're instrumental in where I am right now. So, thanks. Shout out to Rumford Johnny for, connecting us, back in the days. I know Rumford's out there probably listening, somewhere out in those streets,
a true gem of a human being, a true, we should all be more like him.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, listen, that puts basically a bow on it. It's always great to get a chance to chop it up with you. If you're listening to these shows, I'm going to be on vacation next week. I'll be back the week after. We'll be talking about the wide receiver class. Definitely, follow Sigmund Bloom there on all social media platforms. Good luck to everybody that's, doing anything in these fantasy streets for these next few weeks.